Good day to my dear viewers. We are Group 5 here to present Unit 9, to where every behavior a child shows, whether it's curiosity, confidence, or even a sudden tantrum, comes from something deeper than we might think. Behind every action is a process of learning. Behavioral learning approaches help us understand why children and adolescents behave the way they do, and how simple experiences can shape habits, attitudes, and even their future success. By exploring these theory, we uncover powerful insights that teachers, parents, and caregivers can use to guide young people toward positive growth and meaningful learning.
Good day, everyone. So, as we all know that we've been through a lot, okay? Nakaagitag bagyo, nakaagitag earthquake, and everything. So I was wondering if, how is everyone doing? Is everybody okay? Okay, so I hope everyone is doing great. So before we start, I would like to introduce myself. I am Trishia Nicole P. Angtud. I will be your presenter for this introduction of our topic for today, which is behavioral learning theories and approaches to learning. So, as a future educator, understanding how people learn is important because it helps us plan strategies that are effective for different students. In this presentation, I will explain how learning happens, different theories behind it, and how teachers can apply them in the classroom. So before we start with our discussion, I prepared a short activity. So let's have a quick true or false activity. This will help us see what we already know about learning. Raise your hand or show a gesture if you think the statement is true, and stay neutral if you think it is false. So, the first question is, we can learn new behaviors by watching others. Or is it true or false? Okay, is it indeed true? This relates to observational learning, which means that we learn by observing people around us. For example, children learning how to speak, walk, or even behave based on what they see adults doing. In school, when a student sees a classmate volunteering or participating actively and receiving praise, they might do the same. This type of learning is based on imitation. So, other example is, kabantay mo anang, when the teacher asks us something, then if wala pa gani ka ng gana ay ni-raise sa ilang hand, kay dili sad ta mo-raise atong hand. Pero if kanang mo-raise na ang uban sa ilang hand, diha pa sad ta mag-raise. So this shows this statement. Second, rewards can help increase good behavior. Is it true or false? Correct. This is also true. This is known as positive reinforcement. When we reward someone or for doing something good, it motivates them to repeat the action. For example, when a teacher compliments a student for answering correctly or gives extra points for submitting homework early, the student becomes more motivated to perform well again. Rewards can be verbal praise, stars on a chart, or even simple recognition. Sometimes, mahatagan og kanang rewards like food. For example, katong sa una nga kanang if moingon na tong teacher nga og kinsay maka perfect sa iyang quiz, hatagan niya og foods or duaan. Next one is, learning only happens mentally and not through actions. Is it true or false? This is false. Learning involves both mental processing and active behavior. While our brains play a big role in understanding concepts, real learning often occurs through experience and practice. So for example, you didn't learn to ride a bicycle. just by reading about it. You learn by actually riding the bicycle. In education, hands-on learning activities, experiments, and practice are essential to deepen learning. So the next one is repeating an action helps someone learn it better. Is it true or false? Absolutely true. Repetition strengthens the pathways in our brain, making learning more permanent. This is why athletes train regularly or why we review lessons before exams. The more we repeat something, the more familiar it becomes. In teaching, repetition helps improve mastery. So, now, let's move on to our direct discussion. So, may I ask everyone, what is learning? Okay. Learning is a process that leads to a change as a result for experience and practice. It is according to Ambrose et al. This means that learning is not just about acquiring knowledge. It should change how we think or behave. For example, when you learn time management, it should reflect on how you handle tasks. Learning is meaningful only if it changes our behavior or performance. So according to Jerlan on 1994, they defined learning as a relatively permanent change in behavior. This means that when we truly learn something, it stays with us and affects how we act. For example, if you experience being late and face negative consequences, you might become more punctual in the future, or not. Learning also involves developing habits, knowledge, and attitudes. It is not just academic skills. So now, let's move on to the nature of learning. So first, learning is a process. May we think, in what way is learning a process? So, learning moves through stages. First, there is a motive which sparks interest, like wanting to pass a subject. Next, there is a goal such as achieving good grades. However, there are barriers like distractions or difficulty understanding topics. Overcoming these barriers is part of the learning process. This makes learning intentional and purposeful. So, ang giingon diri, learning moves through stages. So, as we all know, that process has different stages. So, like na ay first, second, third, and so on and so forth. So, dili ka maka-learn dayon. Fast learning or like dili ka maka-learn nga gitan-aw ra na nimo ma-learn na nimo diretso. It will undergo a process like step by step process. So it has steps on learning. The next one is learning involves experiences. We believe that experience is a good teacher. So everything around us contributes to learning. Our interactions, our environment, and the training we receive. For example, doing group projects helps learners improve social skills, while debates help develop critical thinking. And so, real life experiences make learning more meaningful and applicable. So, as we all know that experiences are the good teachers. So, maka-learn jud ta if maka-experience ta ana. So, for example, another example is kanang nalamba ta. So, nagdanghag ta and nalamba ta. So, because nalamba ta, naka-experience ta nga nalamba ta, dili na ta magtinanga. Magtarong na ta og dagan or lakaw, dili na ta magdinanghag. So, experience is the best teacher. The next one is learning helps with adjustment. So, through learning, we adapt to different situations. For example, shifting from face-to-face classes to online learning required adjustments in how we study, manage time, and stay motivated. Learning equips us with the skills to respond and adapt effectively. So because of the earthquake and the bagyo, because of the typhoon, our face-to-face learning shifted to online online learning. And so because naanad ta nga mag face-to-face learning ta, lisod para sa atoa nga mag-online class. And so, diri giingon that learning helps with adjustment. Naka-learn ta nga mo adjust sa atong environment just because wala tay mahimo sa ato ang nature, like calamities, dili man dyan na nato malikayan. And so, to be safe, we have to stay at home. And so, we have to adjust nga magka-learn ta sa ato ang balay through online platforms. The next one is learning is universal and continuous. Learning starts from the moment we are born and continues our entire life, often referred to as from womb to tomb. Babies learn to walk, students learn academics, adults learn life skills, and even senior citizens continue to learn. Learning never stops because we constantly encounter new experiences. So another example is you are a teacher. Just because you are a teacher doesn't mean that you know everything. So if mag-teaching ka or mag-discussion ka, you have to ask your students if what they think about the discussion you're having. So in that way, maka-learn ka sa ila, maka-learn sad sila from you. So naa kay learnings nga makuha gikan sa imong students. So this means that learning is continuous. And now, let's proceed to the types of learning. So, the first one is observational learning. In observational learning, we acquire behavior by watching others. This is common in modeling, imitation, and demonstration activities. For example, apprentices learn a skill by watching experienced workers, or students learn classroom behavior by observing teachers' expectations. So, this type of learning is kanang what we see. So, because nakita ni nato, ma-adapt ni nato. Just like the kids, if makita ta sa kids nga kanang buutan ta, mo bless ta sa atong elderly, or like be respectful ta, the kids will follow us. So baka-observe man ang mga kids nga buutan ta, and then the kids will follow us, and the kids will be buutan also. So this what the observational learning means. Another thing is associative learning. In associative learning, learners connect one event to another. For example, when students associate high grades with hard work, they develop better study habits. Another example is learning to avoid touching hot objects because it previously caused pain. It is based on forming connections between stimulus and response. This means that bisag nakahibaw ka nga nakahibaw ka nga pwede nimo buhaton ang one thing nya, pwede sad nimo buhaton ang isa ka thing also, so imo silang gi-connect with each other. So because nag-study kag harder and everything else, nakakuha kag high grade. So that's what associative learning means. So now let's also move on to approaches to learning. So there are different types of approaches to learning. One is behavioral approach. This approach is based on the idea that learning is shaped by our environment. It focuses on observable behaviors rather than thinking processes. Teachers using this approach employ strategies like repetition, drill exercises, rewards, or sometimes consequences. For example, using a reward system or classroom behavior chart is part of the behavioral approach. So, this type of learning, uh, this type of approach to learning is based on the behaviors of the students. So for example, makita nimo nga bati og batasan nimong student, so magbutang ka sa imuhang wall sa imong classroom nga og behavioral chart. This way maka-adapt ang students sa ana og bakit ana nila ang imuhang behavioral chart nga gipakita. So this would also mean that if you are a good teacher, your students will also be good. Okay? So the next one is social cognitive approach. According to Albert Bandura introduced the social cognitive theory. He stated that learning happens by observing others and through the interactions of personal factors, environment, and behavior. He identified 4 components. Attention. Attention means learners must focus. If students are distracted, they won't learn because they won't focus on one thing. Like for example, if mag-focus ang student sa teacher nga nag-discuss, malamang maka-learn jud ang students. But if not, and nakigtabi siya while the teacher is discussing, dili jud maka-learn ang student ana. The next one is retention. They need to remember what they learned. So, this means that after mag-focus og kanang paminaw ang students, dapat ma-remember sa students ang discussion sa teacher because it is also important for the learning. The next one is reproduction. They should be able to perform the behavior. So for example, ang teacher nag-discuss and then na-remember sa student ang gidiscuss sa teacher, then the student will be able to perform the discussed lessons of the teacher. The next one is motivation. They must be encouraged either through rewards or goals. So, dapat na-adjust motivation ang students to learn. Like for example, they will be able to learn because ang motivation nila is makapasar sila niya if ang naay gift nga ihatag if makapasar sila. Like for example, hatagan baron nimo og Harry Potter book set ang student. Sana all, matera. And so, this is what motivation means. So for example, all throughout, a child learns how to solve a math problem by watching the teacher demonstrate it. This shows the attention. And then he remembers the steps. So this shows retention. And then he tried to solve it himself. This shows reproduction and is motivated by getting it correct. So this shows motivation. Understood? Okay. So the next one is information processing approach. This approach compares the human brain to a computer. Like, gi-associate sa human brain, ang kaninga approach is gi-associate ang human brain sa computer. So, learning goes through 3 stages. So, there are 3 stages of learning. So, the first one is encoding. The information enters our brain. So, ang kaning encoding, nisud na ang mga information sa atong brain. Like, na-hear na nato ang information and then it will go inside our brain for the process of storage. It is kept in memory. So, ato gihapon nang gi-memorize. And then, the third one is retrieval. We recall it when needed. So, nakabantay mo ng when you hear something and then magstay na siya sa imuhang memory, and then as the time goes by, naakay na remember exactly like what you hear or what you think, that the information ay kanang information nga ni enter sa atong brain. So that's what it means. So it assumes that learning improves when information is organized and reinforced. This is why teachers use charts, diagrams, and practice tests. So maotang na ay kanang pre-task kay para mahibaw-an na to og unsay level sa learning sa atong students. So the next one is cognitive constructivist approach. It is according to Piaget, learners actively construct knowledge through experience. They don't just absorb information, they build understanding by exploring and questioning. So there are few principles of cognitive constructivist approach. Learning is constructed, not absorbed. It is active, not passive. Knowledge is socially influenced. It is personal and unique. Learning happens in the mind through processing. This approach supports student-centered learning. Instead of just receiving information, students are encouraged to investigate, use hands-on activities, and discover concepts on their own. So, in conclusion, learning is a continuous process influenced by experience, environment, observation, and personal effort. Each learning theory provides insights into how students can effectively gain knowledge. As future educators, understanding these theories will help us design classroom strategies that are appropriate for different types of learners. So, if you this concludes my discussion. If you have any questions regarding our lesson, don't hesitate to ask me or PM me. Thank you so much for listening. Bye bye.
Social constructivist. The social constructivist approach is based on Lev Vygotsky's theory, which says that learning happens best through social interaction. This means that we learn more effectively when we collaborate and communicate with others. Instead of learning alone, in this approach, knowledge is built through shared experiences and discussions within cultural and social context. It also emphasizes that learners actively construct their own understanding by engaging with others, like classmates and teachers, using language as the main tool for learning. So, for example, when we work together in a group or share ideas in class discussions, we're actually helping each other build new knowledge together. So basically, this approach shows that learning in a social process where we learn with and from others. Now, let's talk about the principles of social constructivist approach. First is learning happens through social interaction. This means that students learn best when they communicate, share ideas, and work together with others. Second, focuses on the zone of proximate development. This is the gap between what a learner can do alone and what they can do with the help of others, like teachers or classmates. Third, teachers use scaffolding to support learners. Scaffolding means giving guidance or help at the start and then slowly removing it as the learner becomes more independent. Next is language is key to learning because it helps us express ideas and understand others. Also, lastly, culture shapes knowledge. This means our background, experiences, and environment affect how we learn and make sense of things. So overall, social constructivist approach highlights that learning is not an individual process but something we build together through interaction, language, and culture. So next is connectionism. Connectionism theory was developed by Edward Thorndike, and it's based on the idea of active learning. This theory explains that learning happens through the connection or association between a stimulus and a response. For example, when a student studies hard and gets a good grade, the positive result becomes a reward, and that strengthens the habit of studying. But if the response doesn't lead to the reward or success, the connection becomes weaker. Thorndike called this the stimulus response theory, which means that behaviors are learned through trial and error. We try different actions, and the ones that give good results are repeated while the others are avoided. So in short, connectionism shows that learning is a process of forming habits based on experiences and their outcomes. We learn from our actions and the results they bring. Okay, now let's talk about the law of effect, which is one of Thorndike's laws of learning. This law means that learning happens best when the result of an action gives satisfaction or a positive feeling. In other words, if a learner feels happy after doing something, they are more likely to do it again. For example, if a student answers correctly and the teacher praises them, that good feeling motivates them to keep learning and participating. But if learner experiences dissatisfaction or negative feedback, it can reduce their motivation and slow down their learning progress. So, the law of effect simply shows that pleasant outcomes strengthen learning while unpleasant experiences weaken it. Next is the law of exercise, which means that learning becomes stronger the more we practice it. In simple terms, the more we repeat or use a certain behavior, the more it becomes a habit. For example, if we regularly perform experiments like measuring chemicals or using a microscope, the more they practice, the more skilled and confident they become in handling lab equipment. This shows the law of exercise, which means that repeated practice strengthens learning. The more you repeat a task, like conducting experiments, the more accurate and automatic your skills become. Thorndike also explains that there are two sub-laws under this, which is the law of use and the law of disuse. The law of use this means that the more a learner uses practice a certain response, the stronger the connection becomes between the stimulus and response. In simple terms, practice makes learning stronger. Okay, law of disuse. This means that if a learner stops using or practicing a response, the connection becomes weaker over time. In simple terms, when you stop practicing, you start forgetting. Next is the law of readiness. This law means that learning happens best when a person is mentally, emotionally, and physically ready to learn. When a learner is prepared and willing to respond to a stimulus or lesson, learning becomes stronger and more effective. For example, if a student is interested and focused during class, it's easier for them to understand and remember the lesson. But if the student is distracted or not in the mood to learn, even if the teacher explains well, learning becomes harder. So the law of readiness reminds us that being prepared and motivated is an important part of learning because readiness makes the bond between the learner and the lesson stronger. Next is conditioning. This theory explains how learning happens through association. It means that a person or even an animal learns to connect a certain stimulus or situation with a specific response or behavior. Conditioning is an important part of learning because it shows how experiences shape our own actions. There are two main types of conditioning. First is the classical conditioning theory. This theory explains that learning happens through association. It means that a person or even an animal learns to connect one thing with another. For example, when a certain sound, object, or situation is always followed by a specific response, our brain starts to connect them automatically. In short, classical conditioning is all about learning through repetition and association. We develop certain behaviors or responses after repeatedly experiencing them in connection with something in our environment. So now, let's talk about the four elements of classical conditioning. First is the unconditional stimulus. This is something that naturally causes a reaction. Next is the unconditional response. This is the automatic reaction to that stimulus. Third, we have conditioned stimulus. This is something that was originally neutral but becomes association with the unconditioned stimulus through repetition. And lastly, the conditioned response. This is the learned reaction to the conditioned stimulus. In short, these four elements work together to show how learning can happen just by connecting one thing with another through experience and repetition. Next, for the second main theory of conditioning, we have the contiguous conditioning theory. This theory is called contiguity theory. It explains that learning happens when a stimulus and a response occur close together in time. In simple terms, it means that when two things happen one after another repeatedly, our brain connects them. For example, if every time you hear the school bell, you immediately go out for recess, you eventually learn to stand up and prepare to go at the moment you hear the bell, even if no one tells you to. This theory focuses on the timing of events. The closer the stimulus and the response happen together, the stronger the learning connection becomes. So for the third main theory of conditioning, we have the operant conditioning theory by B.F. Skinner. This theory focuses on how behavior is influenced by its consequences, meaning what happens after an action. According to this theory, people tend to repeat behaviors that brings rewards or positive outcomes, and they usually avoid behaviors that lead to punishment or negative outcomes. So for example, if a student studies hard and get praised by the teacher, that student is more likely to study hard again. But if the student gets scolded for being noisy in class, they'll probably avoid doing that next time. So basically, operant conditioning teaches us that our actions are shaped by rewards and punishment, and this helps us learn which behaviors are good or bad.
Start my report, I have a game. 4 picks, 1 word. The only thing you do is to guess it. Now we're done. Good job, everyone. You did a great job. And now we will tackle about the behavior analysis in education and the gestalt learning insights. Behavior analysis in education is the process of understanding why students behave the way they do and using that understanding to help them learn better and behave appropriately in school. So there are three kinds of behavioral management strategy. First, we have the classroom strategies. So it is the methods, techniques, or actions a teacher uses to keep the classroom organized, calm, and focused. It also helps prevent misbehavior before it happens. It is part of the behavioral management strategy because when the classroom is structured and students know what to do, they are less likely to misbehave and also guide students toward positive behavior. So for example, ang kanang rules nga, raise your hand before speaking or raise your hand before answering. So in this way mangyod, it ang teacher created these rules kay para ma-organize ang mga students if mangutana siya. If mangutana siya o mangutana siya, then ang students kibaw na sila buhaton, which is erase ilang hand usa mutubag kung tawgon sila. So another example is kana bitong mga boys sa back. So di ba we all know nga di lang ko i-holistic pero way back when I was grade 12 maugid na ang mga boys kung magtapok sa luyo langas gid kaayo. Then dili sila mo focus, di sila maminaw if na mag-discuss sa tubangan. So ang gibuhat sa akong advisor ato that time is gipatubangan niya ang mga boys which is sa left side. So gipatubangan niya kay mo na iyang way para ang mga boys malesen ang kasabaan and also makafocus sad sila kay na naman sila sa tubangan. Next, we have the setting events. So are things that happen before the behavior that influence how students act. They are not always seen in the classroom but can affect mood, attention, and behavior. It is also part of the behavioral management strategy because it helps teachers understand the reason behind a student's behavior and also allows them to respond with understanding and support, not just punishment. For example, relate kita ni mga students. Kanang dili mo eat og breakfast and also walay enough sleep. Diba? It leads us nga dili ta maka-focus and also the way nga muakta everyday lain na gid kayo. Like luya na kay ta, dili ta ingon jolly kaayo, dili na watay gana mo halubilo, diba? So mo ni ang setting events, iyaging mean and is to know nganong inana ang acts sa usa ka students. And also example specifically kato diba in STP na to sayo kayo 7 AM and mostly ang mga students di gid mamahaw. So that time katong natay exam nga 100 kutob, Ma'am Duliton give us 30 minutes break, diba? Pakanon ta niya daan. Kay kibalo siya nga mga students kin ana kay wa gid na mahaw. Moto kay she thinks nga and she knows rather nga if dili makapamahaw ang mga students, dili sila maka-focus, dili sila kanunaan sa i-answer nila sa exam because of kanang kagutom ra ilang na feel. Lastly, we have the use of reinforcement. It means rewarding positive behavior so that students will repeat it. It is part of the behavioral management strategy because it encourages students to choose good behavior because they know it leads to praise or reward. And also it builds a positive classroom environment. So ang kanidang use of reinforcement, dili ni kaning digaan kag butang or pagkaon if ma-perfect ka of nindot imong performance, diba? It also includes verbal praise. For example, katong last activity na to sa the contemporary world, diba? Giinan ta ni Miss Kasinto nga very good kay nindot na kay mohimog PPT and also very good kay confidence na kay ta sa mga performance task. So, in this way, ma-encourage magid ang mga students nga ay inani akong buhaton sunod kay gi-praise man ko kay sakto akong gibuhat. And also another example is that kanang mga kinder students, diba? Makakuha na sila star, tigan sila star if ma-perfect sila or nindot ilang performance that day. So, in this way man gyud ang students makathink nga ay mo ni akong buhatog balik which is to repeat it kay kibaw sila nga mao nay sakto and nindot ilang performance that day. So it leads to a positive behavior. That's all for the behavior analysis in education. Do you have any questions about the kinds of behavioral management strategy? Now, we move forward to tackle about Gestalt insight learning. So the word Gestalt means the whole form or the way something is organized. Gestalt psychology explains that when you look at things, we don't just see separate parts. We see a whole image. For example, when you see a face, you don't focus separately on the eyes, nose, and mouth. Your brain puts all these parts together to form one whole image. So this is the idea of Gestalt. And also it considered a sensual theory, which means it focuses on what we see through our senses like light, dark, areas, edges, and shapes. Our brain uses these small visual details to create a complete image. And always remember that Gestalt and perceptual theories are different. Because if we see Gestalt, it is how we see objects as a whole. And if we see perceptual theories, it is what meaning or interpretation we attach to what we see. So there are 7 steps in insight learning. First, we have the identification of the problem. The learner becomes aware that there is a problem or an obstacle preventing them from reaching their goal. This recognition motivates the learner to look for a solution. For example, a student wants to print a project but realizes the printer has no ink. So, it's really obvious nga ang problema kay wala siya ink, mong dili siya ka-print sa iyang project. Second, we have the analysis of the problem situation. So, the learner examines the situation carefully. They observe the parts of the problem and look for connections between the goal and the barrier. For example, is that a person wants to go out but cannot find their keys. So, if we use the analysis of the problem situation, so ang person iya sang i-check iyang bag or table or asa siya last ni visit nga areas para iyang ma-locate ang keys nga nawagtang. Third, we have the establishing mental associations with past experiences. The learner connects the current problem with previous similar situations. These recalled experiences help them think of possible solutions. For examples, 'di ba, as a science major and also gikan sa STEM, 'di ba, nanamoy knowledge samot na sa physics, nanamoy kumbaga advantage because din makibaw naman mo nga ay ninion man ni pag-solve mao man ni paagi pag-solve. So that is the example of the establishing mental association with past experiences. Fourth, we have the trial of mode of response. The learner begins trying out the possible solutions they have thought about. Although limited, these small trials help guide them toward the correct solutions. So for examples, the students tries applying a familiar formula to a new math questions. It means that if they try the familiar formula to the new math questions, it helps them guide toward the correct solution and the correct formula to use. Fifth, we have the sustained attention. The learner maintains focus on the goal. They do not easily give up and continue thinking and analyzing until the solution becomes clear. So for example, in our inorganic chemistry, we know that it needs effort and also a focus because it has a lot of formulas or solving parts. So, sustained attention encourages us to think and also analyze the para ang solution na makita ra nato, 'di ba? Sa example sa atong mga solving parts. So, atong kanon nga unsay right nga formula gamiton o unsay i-analyze nato unsay gipangita sa problem. So in this way makibaw na ta nga unsaon pag-solve and makibaw na ta unsay angay i-answer or unsay answer ani nga problema. Sixth, we have the establishing cause and effect relationship. The learner suddenly realizes how all parts of the problem fit together. They understand the cause and effect clearly, leading to a correct action. For example, a person realizes the faucet leaks because the handle isn't fully tightened, di ba? So in this way, makibaw ta ay the faucet leaks kay tungod wala man siya nasirado og tarong. Lastly, we have the steady repetition of adaptive behavior. After solving the problem through insight, the learner applies the same strategy to other similar situations. These three things learning and improves problem-solving skills. So for example, a student uses the same algebra solving pattern for similar problems. So kumbaga, kung unsa imong na-learn, pwede nimo siya i-apply sa similar situations which is naka-improve sa problem-solving skills nimo. That's all for the Gestalt in the 7 steps in insight learning. So do you have any questions? So now we have a quick summary for all my report. Always remember that behavior management strategies in education are designed to help teachers manage and guide students' behavior, fostering positive relationship and a productive classroom environment. These strategies include classroom techniques, awareness of setting events, and reinforcement, which support students in developing desired behaviors and achieving learning goals. Teachers can adjust the environment, provide feedbacks, and recognize positive behaviors to encourage learners. At the same time, Gestalt in 7 steps insights learning focus on how students perceive and solve problems. Gestalt emphasizes that learners see situations as a whole rather than separate parts, while insights learning involves steps such as identifying a problem, analyzing it, connecting it to prior knowledge, testing solutions, and applying successful strategies. This approach helps students develop critical thinking, problem solving skills, and adaptive behaviors. By combining behavior management strategies with insight learning, teachers can both guide students' behavior and enhance cognitive development, creating a classroom that supports learning, problem solving, and personal growth. And that's all for my report. And I hope you learned something and don't hesitate to ask questions if you have confusion. Thank you.
Hello, hello, hello. Good. Activity time.
Law of pregnancy. Pregnant is a German for pregnant but in the sense of pregnant with the meaning. Rather than pregnant with a child, these laws say that we are innately driven to experience things in a good adjustal as possible. The law of pregnancy states when we look at the complex of or unclear image, our brain automatically organizes them into a simplest, most stable, and most meaningful from possible. In short, our mind prefers a simple, organized shape instead of complicated one. Even if the visual information is incomplete or messy, we tend to see the simplest possible pattern. 2. Law of similarity. Similarity means there is a tendency to see groups which have the same characteristic. The principle of similarity states that things which share visual characteristics such as a shape, size, color. The law of similarity. The law of similarity states that an object that look like are automatically grouped together by our brain. It means we tend to see items or belonging to the same group when they are shared similarities in shape, size, color, texture, organization, or style. 3. Law of contrast. The principle based on the assumption that individual base their behavior on comparison of opposite, not with sameness. The law of contrast. It means the law of contrast states that we notice and understand things better when they are different from others around them. Our brain pays more attention to the object that stand out because of their color, size, shape, brightness, composition. Number 4. Law of proximity. Proximity occurs when elements are placed close together. They tend to be preserved as a group. This states that things which are closer together will be seen as belong together. Things that are close to one another are preserved to be more related. The law of proximity. The law of proximity states that objects that are placed close to each other are seen as belong to the same group. Even if the objects look different, our brain groups them together simply because they are near one another. In short, things that are close together are preserved as related. Mean close group, far apart is separate. Number 5. Law of uniform connection. The principle of uniform connectedness is the strongest of the Gestalt principle concerned with that relatedness. It refers to the fact that elements that are connected by uniform visual properties are preserved as being more related. Law of uniform connectedness. The law of uniform connectedness states that elements that are connected by a line, color, shape, or any visual link are seen as more related than elements that are not connected. This is one of the strongest Gestalt law, meaning that brains strongly assume that things are grouped if they are visually connected, even if they differ in shape, size, or color. In short, if things are connected, we see them as a group. Number 7. Law of closure. This result is a fact of filling in missing information or organizing information which is present to make a whole. The principle of closure is literally about drawing conclusion. We humans are very adept at drawing conclusion from less than all the information. The law of closure states that our brain naturally tries to complete incomplete shape or information to form a whole and meaningful picture. Even when the parts are missing, we fill in the gaps mentally.
This happens because humans are very good at drawing conclusions, even with the incomplete details. In short, we complete what is incomplete. Our brain fills in a missing part to make a whole image. Educational implication of Gestalt theory, from whole to part. The teacher should present the subject matter as a whole to facilitate insight learning. Whole to part. Gestalt theory says learning understand better when they see the whole idea first before the smaller details. Instead of giving isolated part, the teacher must present entire concepts so student can see the relationship among the parts. Example, when teaching a story, the teacher first tells whole story or give a summary after the teacher discuss characters, setting, plot, and
Integrated
etc.
approach. While planning curriculum, Gestalt principles should be given due consideration. A particular subject should not be treated as mere collection of isolated facts. It should be closely integrated into a whole.
Integrated approach. Gestalt theory emphasizes that learning should not be fragmented. Oy. One, two, three, go. Integrated approach. Gestalt theory emphasizes that learning should not be fragmented into unrelated facts. Subjects should be connected so students see the bigger picture. The curriculum should allow integration of ideas instead of teaching facts in isolation.
Number 5. Goal orientation. As learning is a purposeful and goal-oriented task, the learning has to be well acquainted with these objectives. He should be fully familiar with the goals and purpose of the everyday task.
Goal orientation in Gestalt theory. In Gestalt theory, learning is purposeful. Students learn better when they clearly understand why they are doing an activity and what the goal they are trying to achieve. When learners see the whole purpose of a task, they become more motivated, focused, and able to connect the parts of the lesson meaningful. Gestalt psychologists emphasize that a clear goal gives direction, helps students organize information, see relationship, and make sense of what they are learning.
Number 7. Checking of previous experience. As insight depends upon the previous experience of the learning, the teacher must check the previous experience of the child and relate them with the new learning situation.
Checking of previous experience. Insight learning depends on what students already know. Before teaching a new lesson, teacher must check student prior knowledge or experience and connect it to the new topic. It helps learners understand faster because they can relate new information to the something familiar.
Experiential learning theory. Learning theory is a constructivist learning theory that emphasizes the importance of learning from experience. According to David Kolb, the psychologist who proposed this theory, our experiential learning can be defined as the process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience. Number 1. Abstract conceptualization, the process of creating concepts that integrate experience into a theories. It involves thinking about ideas and concepts that are not necessarily tied to specific experience.
Conceptualization is the process of forming ideas, concepts, or theories based on experience. Instead of focusing on what happened directly, the learning think deeply, emphasize pattern, and create general principle or theories that explain the experience. In simple words, it means using thinking, logic, and reasoning to create a bigger idea from what you experience. This is one of Cobalt's learning style, where learning happens by reflecting and form concept, not just doing.
Number 2. Concrete experience. The process of learning through direct involvement is a specific experience. It involves actively engaging with the environment and learning from the outcomes of those experiences.
Concrete experience. Concrete experience means learning by doing. It is the process of gaining knowledge through direct involvement in relationship, activities, or hands-on tasks. Instead of thinking what are theories or ideas, first the learning, participation in activity, experience is
it firsthand. Observation what happens, learns from what the actual event. In simple word, concrete experience learning by direct action, real world involvement or actual experience. Reflect observation, the process of reflecting on a past experience and learn from them. It involves analyze past experience and identifying what worked well and what did not work well. Reflective observation is the process of thinking deeply about past experience to understand what happened and why. Instead of acting immediately, the learning step back, observe, reflect, and analyze the experience. It involves reviewing what happened, identifying what went well, noticing what did not work, understanding the reason behind the result, using insight to improve future action. In simple word, reflection, observation, learning by thinking what you are experience.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to whatever time you are watching me today. Let's talk about what truly shapes learning. But before that, let's start with a short activity which I call it What Happens Next. In this activity, you'll simply watch a series of short scenarios. Each clip can show anything, and as you watch it, try to predict what will happen. Then I'll reveal the actual outcome and connect it to what research says about behavioral learning. Your task is just to observe, think, and notice. Now, first up, look at this kid raising her hand. If she got the right answer, what do you think will happen?
Yes, the answer is
Right. If you get the correct answer, people will clap at you, praise you perhaps. Doing a job well done. Now for this little cutie. He just did something bad. What do you think will happen to him? Well, the little cutie just got a punishment since he did do a bad thing. So, negative equals negative, positive equals positive. And as educators, I believe that instead of punishing children, we should correct them instead and give an effect that negativity is bad and bring positivity into the light. Not just what we teach, but how we teach, why we teach, and who we teach. First term to dive in is pedagogy. Pedagogy is simply our approach to teaching, the art and science of helping students learn, but it's more than studies. It's understanding that learning is influenced by social, political, and psychological factors. Pedagogy, the study of how knowledge and skills are imparted in an educational context. We, as teachers, we don't just deliver lessons, we design experiences that shape minds, values, and futures. Next is cognitive development. Cognitive development is how learners think, explore, understand, solve problems, and process information. It's how they make sense of the world. In psychology, the focus of cognitive development has often been only in childhood. However, cognitive development continues through adolescence and adulthood. In early childhood, this looks like curiosity, touching, testing, imagining. In middle childhood, students learn to see beyond themselves, consider others' perspective, and think more logically. In adolescence, their world expands. They develop deeper reasoning, richer vocabulary, and a capacity to handle complex ideas. And even in higher education, learning continues, demanding new forms of independence and critical thinking. As teachers, our role is to meet the mind where it is and stretch it further. Now, up next, pedagogical applications to cognitive development. This means we design learning experiences that match how students' mind grows. It connects with asset that is needed to present. Create cognitive psychology based on the learning process. For example, we use stories, visuals, and hands-on tasks for young learners. We challenge tweens with real-world problems. We empower teens with debates and analysis. We guide adults through self-directed exploration. Good teaching is never one size fits all. It evolves within the learner. Now next, pedagogical content knowledge, or in other terms, PCK. PCK, as Lee Schulman introduced a powerful idea, it's not enough to know your subject. And it's not enough to know how to teach. You must know how to teach your subject to your students. PCK is the combining of pedagogy and subject content knowledge, which Schulman, as I have said, re-emphasized during in the 1980s. Lee Schulman is one of the most influential educational psychologists in the world that even led to teachers training change today. He not only introduced pedagogical content knowledge or PCK, changing how the world understands great teaching, he was also the former president of Carnegie Foundation, recipient of the Gray Mayer Award in Education for Impactful Ideas, member of the National Academy of Education, honoring his lifelong contribution. Encourage reflection, continuous improvement, and learning from mistake. PCK is the sweet spot where content knowledge, what we teach, pedagogy, how we teach, student understanding, who we teach, all come together. First key element that I will be introducing to you of PCK is knowledge of representation of subject matter. As it says, it extends beyond knowing a lot about something. It suggests that both educators and students think in a disciplined manner. It is knowing how to explain complex ideas in clear, relatable ways. Choosing the right examples, models, and representations, understanding your students' backgrounds, needs, and challenges. Second key element of PCK is the knowledge of the purpose of education. Coach Ran later expanded this into PCKG, reminding us that good teaching grows continuously, shaped by context, environment, and experience. Teaching is not static, it is alive, responding, and evolving. He highlighted that Schulman's concept of PCK is stagnant and divided. That's why he even expanded it more, connecting content to purpose, to why it matters. Now we have four vital aspects of teacher education, including subject matter knowledge. It is important for teachers to be confident on the subject or content they are to present. It allows them to explain ideas clearly, answer questions accurately, and guide students toward true understanding, not just memorization. Second, pedagogical knowledge or knowledge of pedagogy. Great teaching requires knowing how to teach, using strategies, methods, techniques that make learning easier, more engaging, and more meaningful for every type of learner. Knowledge of students. Teachers must understand who their students are, their abilities, struggles, interests, and backgrounds, so they can connect lessons to real life experiences and support every learner effectively. And also, lastly, knowledge of environmental context. Knowing the environment, school culture, community needs, available resources, and classroom conditioning helps teachers design lessons that are realistic, responsive, and supportive of students' daily realities. When teachers understand their subject, master the art of teaching, know their students deeply, and respond to their environment, they just don't deliver lessons. They transform lives. This is the heart of PCK and the reason great teachers create learning that truly lasts. To enumerate to you of each state's focus or effects that comes from education itself. First off, early childhood, social and emotional development, promoting young children's social and emotional health. Next up is middle childhood. Develop of self and social understanding. It focuses on children's cognitive development. It is a time when children becomes less egocentric and much more responsive to the views of others. Now up next is adolescence. The adolescent must develop expanded verbal skills because adolescents mature intellectually as they face increased school demands and as they prepare for adult roles. They must develop new verbal skills to accommodate more complex and concepts. Higher education. Higher education takes a much different approach. It has traditional lecture, an accepted teaching approach, especially in large classes and the sciences. Many students still spend their class hours passively taking notes as the professor talks. And that's all for current research and pedagogical application. Because when we apply pedagogy, cognitive development, PCK, we stop being mere deliverers of information. We become architects of understanding, coaches of thinking, and champions of human growth. That is the heart of our profession. We don't just teach lessons, we teach people. We don't just aim for learning, we aim for transformation. And thank you for being here with us listening to our lesson about behavioral learning theories and approaches to learning. Have a great day!